Tulsa King Season 3 Episode 2 doesn't waste a second. The blood spilled in the premiere wasn't the climax, it was only the opening shot. Episode 2 picks up right where the tension left off. And it's clear this war in Tulsa isn't going to wait for anyone to catch their breath. Jeremiah's brutal strike on Theo Montague in Episode 1 wasn't just shocking, it was strategic. By seizing the Montague estate through blood and fire, Jeremiah didn't just erase a rival family. He planted his flag in Dwight's territory. That act alone shifted the balance of power, and now Dwight is under pressure from every direction. On one side, Jeremiah is claiming dominance with ruthless efficiency. On the other, Musso, the FBI puppet master, is tightening the leash and reminding Dwight that his freedom comes with strings attached. In the middle of this, Dwight has to ask himself, is he the one controlling Tulsa? Or is he just another pawn in someone else's game? The fallout from Theo's murder isn't as simple as revenge. For Dwight, it's personal and professional all at once. He had been circling a deal that could have stabilized things, maybe even brought a fragile peace. Jeremiah ripped that chance away, leaving Dwight cornered and humiliated. That kind of insult doesn't just disappear in the underworld, it festers, it fuels. It burns until it explodes. And Dwight isn't the kind of man to let something like this slide. But how he reacts now could define the rest of the season. If he lashes out too hard, Musso will slam him down. If he holds back, Jeremiah only grows stronger. This is Dwight's tightrope walk, and one wrong move could send his whole crew into the abyss. Meanwhile, inside Dwight's own circle, cracks are already spreading. Bod's grief and frustration boiled over in Episode 1 when he lashed out at one of Bill's men. And that outburst was a warning sign. Dwight tried to smooth it over, pretending it was just an emotional slip. But anyone watching closely can see the storm building in Bod's eyes. His loyalty is slipping and his anger is searching for a target. On the surface, it's Bill he wants revenge on for Jimmy's death, but underneath it all, resentment toward Dwight is growing. After all, Dwight chose to partner with the very man Bod blames for Jimmy's fate. That's a betrayal Bod can't swallow forever. In Episode 2, his role feels like a ticking time bomb. Will he explode against Dwight directly? Or will he let Jeremiah pull him in with promises of power and recognition Dwight has denied him? And then there's Margaret. Her loyalty in Episode 1 felt noble, but in this world, loyalty isn't safe, it's dangerous. She chose Dwight over her own safety, refusing to walk away even when he tried to push her out. That decision has already painted a target on her back. Jeremiah could use her as leverage, Musso could threaten her as a bargaining chip. And every rival with eyes on Dwight knows she's his weakness. Episode 2 makes it clear Margaret isn't just part of Dwight's personal life anymore. She's become a liability that could shape his decisions, cloud his judgment, and force his hand in ways that might not always make sense. Love has no place in this battlefield, and yet here it is, right in the middle of Dwight's war. Beyond Tulsa, the shadows of New York creep closer. Ray, the man dangling Dwight's old life in front of him, isn't done. His threats in Episode 1 weren't idle talk. He's got connections, reach, and the kind of patience that makes him even more dangerous. Episode 2 hints that Ray might push harder. Maybe even turn Dwight's grandchildren into pawns in this chess game. That kind of move would stretch Dwight to thin, fighting Jeremiah's war in Tulsa, while keeping Ray's claws off his family in New York. And if Ray decides to team up with Jeremiah, that's when Dwight could find himself trapped in a two-front war, surrounded with no way out. But the most unsettling presence in Episode 2 isn't Jeremiah, Ray, or even Dwight's restless allies, it's Musso. The FBI agent's demands remain vague, deliberately unclear, designed to keep Dwight guessing. That's not protection, that's control. Musso's silence feels louder than anyone else's threats, because it means he knows more than he lets on. How did he know about Dwight's talks with the Montagues in Episode 1? Who's feeding him inside information? Episode 2 teases the possibility of a mole within Dwight's inner circle, and if that's true, the betrayal might already be closer than Dwight realizes. This opening stretch of Episode 2 makes one thing certain: Dwight isn't fighting one war. He's fighting many. Jeremiah is a brutal rival, Ray is a shadow from the past, Musso is the leash he can't shake off. And within his own crew, loyalty is hanging by a thread. Tulsa isn't a kingdom, it's a minefield. And Dwight? He's right in the middle, surrounded by storms he might not be able to control. The deeper Episode 2 goes, the clearer it becomes that Jeremiah isn't just another rival, he's a different breed of enemy. When he killed Theo and torched the Montague estate, he didn't just wipe out a family. He sent a message. That message wasn't just for Dwight, it was for everyone watching the chessboard. Jeremiah wants to be seen as untouchable, a man who builds his empire on ash and fear. The problem for Dwight is that kind of fear spreads fast. Every hustler, every small-time operator, every middleman in Tulsa is now asking themselves the same question: why stick with Dwight when Jeremiah is proving he's willing to spill blood to own the streets? And in the underworld, perception is everything. Once doubt starts creeping into the minds of the people working for you, it spreads like wildfire. This puts Dwight in a dangerous bind. On one hand, he knows he can't let Jeremiah's victory stand unanswered, because silence makes him look weak. But on the other hand, Musso is watching like a hawk, waiting for Dwight to step out of line. Musso's leash is invisible but unbreakable, and Dwight knows it. A bloody retaliation against Jeremiah would give Musso the perfect excuse to tighten control or worse, cut Dwight off entirely. And if Musso pulls that protection, Dwight doesn't just lose the leash. He loses his shield against the feds. That's the trap. Every move Dwight makes in Tulsa risks triggering Musso's wrath. But every hesitation risks Jeremiah swallowing the city whole. Episode 2 builds this tension like a drumbeat, forcing Dwight into a corner where the walls are closing in inside his own crew. Things aren't any easier. Bob continues to unravel, and in episode 2, it's impossible to ignore. His grief is eating him alive, twisting into anger. And Dwight's attempts to keep him calm are starting to sound more like empty promises than leadership. Bob sees Dwight making deals with Bill, the man he blames for Jimmy's death. And that's something he'll never forgive. The more Dwight tries to smooth things over, the more Bod feels like he's being silenced, ignored, and pushed aside. And that's dangerous because men like Jeremiah thrive on exploiting cracks like this. Bod doesn't need to flip completely to betray Dwight. Sometimes all it takes is a moment of weakness, a whispered conversation, or even a slip of information in the wrong hands. Episode 2 makes it clear, Dwight isn't just fighting outside enemies. He's trying to hold his crew together with tape and glue. Margaret, meanwhile, refuses to step aside. Dwight's effort to push her away backfired. Her loyalty runs too deep. But now, her loyalty has turned into a liability that everyone around Dwight can see. Jeremiah could use her as leverage, Ray could use her as bait, and Musso could use her as a pressure point. Episode 2 doesn't have to put her in direct danger, yet it only needs to remind us that every moment she stays close to Dwight, she's part of the battlefield. And the cruel truth of this world is that loyalty doesn't keep you safe, it gets you killed. Every time Margaret appears on screen, it feels like a warning. She's a piece on the chessboard that Dwight is desperate to protect. But one wrong move and she could be sacrificed to the game. But it's not just Dwight's love life complicating things. Episode 2 also widens the lens back to New York, where Ray is still circling like a shark. His threats about Dwight's grandchildren weren't idle. Ray doesn't bluff, he plots. And in episode 2, we start to feel the pressure of that long-distance war. Dwight is fighting to keep Tulsa from slipping through his fingers. But he can't stop thinking about Ray's reach. If Ray makes a move on his family, Dwight will have no choice but to split his focus. And splitting his focus is exactly what Jeremiah wants. The genius of this setup is that every enemy Dwight faces seems to be working against him in perfect rhythm, even if they're not officially working together. Jeremiah takes Tulsa, Ray threatens New York. Musso holds the leash. It's a triangle that's tightening around Dwight's neck. Then there's Mitch and Cleo. Episode 2 doesn't forget about them. And their storyline adds another layer to Dwight's war. Cleo is grieving after Theo's death, but grief in Tulsa never stays soft, it hardens into anger, into vengeance. Dwight might find in her a new ally, someone whose pain sharpens her into a fighter. Mitch, on the other hand, sees Cleo as both a reason to fight and a risk to protect. For Dwight, that's a double-edged sword. Allies fueled by revenge can be powerful, but they're also reckless. And reckless people make mistakes. Episode 2 teases that Dwight may soon have to decide whether Cleo's fury helps his cause or jeopardizes it. Either way, it's more weight on his shoulders at a time when he's already drowning. The beauty of episode 2 is how it layers these threats without giving Dwight a clear path forward. Every problem bleeds into the next. Bod's loyalty is shaking, Margaret's safety is in question, Ray's shadow is stretching. Jeremiah's power is rising, and Musso's leash is cutting deeper into Dwight's throat. There's no clean break, no way to fix one without making another worse. That's the storm Dwight is standing in. He can't fight all directions at once. But doing nothing is even worse. Episode 2 leaves us asking the same question Dwight is probably asking himself. Which fire does he put out first, and which one does he let burn? By the time episode 2 digs deeper, the tension between Dwight and Jeremiah is no longer just about territory, it's about pride. Dwight has built his name on respect, discipline, and keeping his word. Jeremiah, he thrives on chaos, fear, and raw intimidation. These are two completely different codes colliding head-on. And that clash is what makes the war feel inevitable. Episode 2 shows that Dwight can't keep treating Jeremiah like a rival he can negotiate with. This is a man who only understands blood. And Dwight knows it. Every time Jeremiah's name comes up, you can feel Dwight's anger boiling. But you can also see his frustration because Musso's leash forces him to play calm when all he wants is war. That inner conflict is what makes this episode so explosive. It's not about whether Dwight wants to fight, it's about whether he's even allowed to. And Musso knows exactly how to twist that knife. Episode 2 makes it clearer than ever that Musso's role isn't just about controlling Dwight's moves, it's about testing his breaking point. Every vague order, every half-truth, every wait-and-see command is designed to push Dwight toward a snap. Musso wants to know how far he can bend the man before he breaks. And Dwight feels that pressure with every conversation. But what makes it worse is the suspicion creeping in. Musso seems to know too much. Someone close to Dwight is talking, feeding information, maybe even steering Musso's view of him. That kind of betrayal is deadly. Because it doesn't just put Dwight at risk, it poisons the trust inside his own circle. And the scariest part? Episode 2 doesn't give us answers. It just dangles the question, who's the rat? The cracks in Dwight's inner circle keep widening, and Bod is at the center of it. His frustration in episode 2 doesn't calm down, it escalates. He feels overlooked, disrespected, and chained to a leader who seems more worried about making deals than protecting family. That kind of resentment is gasoline, and Jeremiah is the perfect spark to ignite it. Episode 2 plants seeds that Bod might not just be drifting away from Dwight. He could already be entertaining thoughts of switching sides, even if he doesn't jump ship outright. His reckless behavior threatens to drag Dwight's crew into danger. Every time Bod lashes out, it gives Jeremiah and Musso more leverage. Dwight can't fight a war if his own soldier is tearing holes in the ship. But dealing with Bod too harshly risks pushing him straight into Jeremiah's arms. It's a no-win situation, and Dwight knows it. Margaret's storyline in episode 2 is equally tense. Her decision to stand by Dwight, no matter the risk, plays like both a strength and a curse. On one hand, her loyalty is unshakable, and Dwight desperately needs that kind of devotion in a world full of liars. On the other hand, everyone sees her as Dwight's weak spot, and it's only a matter of time before someone exploits it. Episode 2 builds that unease beautifully, not by showing her in direct danger, but by letting the threat hang in the air like smoke. Every time she appears, you're waiting for the hammer to fall, wondering who's going to make the first move against her. The tragedy is that Margaret believes her loyalty protects Dwight, when in reality, it's the very thing putting a target on her back. Ray's presence looms larger too. And even though he's miles away in New York, episode 2 reminds us that distance doesn't mean safety. His threats about Dwight's grandchildren weren't empty words, and the thought of Ray making good on them weighs heavy. Dwight can't fight Jeremiah full force while worrying about his family, and Ray knows it. The brilliance of Ray's strategy is that he doesn't even need to attack yet. Just the idea that he might is enough to shake Dwight's focus. But if Ray and Jeremiah were to connect, if their interests aligned, episode 2 teases that possibility without confirming it, and that's what makes it terrifying. Imagine Dwight fighting Jeremiah in the streets of Tulsa while Ray uses New York to choke him from afar. That's not a war, that's a trap, and it's the kind of trap even Dwight might not crawl out of. And then there's Mitch and Cleo. Their grief over Theo's death is still raw. And in episode 2, it sharpens into something darker. Cleo's pain doesn't look like weakness, it looks like fuel. She's angry, restless, and ready to fight, even if it means putting herself in the line of fire. For Dwight, that's both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, Cleo's rage could give him a fierce new ally, someone with nothing to lose and everything to prove. On the other hand, vengeance makes people reckless, and reckless allies are just as dangerous as enemies. Episode 2 shows us a Cleo who's ready to step up. But whether that helps Dwight or complicates things is still unclear. What ties all of this together is the sense that Dwight's empire is cracking from the inside. At the same time, enemies circle from the outside. Jeremiah is making power moves, Ray is tightening his threats, Musso is pulling the strings, and Dwight's own people are beginning to question him. The episode paints a picture of a man trapped in a tightening cage, forced to fight battles he didn't choose while trying to protect people he can't fully control. And in Tulsa, that's the kind of pressure that always leads to one thing: violence. Episode 2 doesn't just tease the coming storm, it makes you feel the thunder rumbling, reminding us that when this war explodes, it won't just be between Dwight and Jeremiah. It'll be a war that touches everyone, friend and foe alike. As episode 2 pushes deeper, the danger around Dwight doesn't feel distant anymore, it feels immediate, like a storm that's already breaking over his head. Jeremiah's strike on the Montagues was the spark, but by now it's clear he's not stopping there. His message wasn't just to Dwight. It was to the entire Tulsa underworld: I'm the one in charge now. That kind of claim doesn't go unchallenged, and Dwight knows it. But here's the catch: Jeremiah doesn't need to fight Dwight directly to win. All he has to do is peel away Dwight's alliances one by one, bleed his resources dry, and let suspicion eat away at his crew. And episode 2 teases that this exact plan might already be in motion. Every whispered doubt, every glance of mistrust, every sign of Bod's rebellion, they're not random. They're symptoms of Jeremiah's shadow pressing in. What makes Jeremiah so dangerous is his unpredictability. He isn't bound by rules and he doesn't need approval. Where Dwight has to balance Musso's leash, old loyalties, and the fragile trust of his crew, Jeremiah answers only to himself. That gives him freedom, and in the underworld, freedom is terrifying. Episode 2 shows the contrast clearly. Dwight's every move feels calculated, restrained, tied up in consequences, while Jeremiah's moves feel wild, violent, and impossible to predict. That imbalance tilts the field in Jeremiah's favor because fear always spreads faster than respect. And in Tulsa, people are starting to wonder if Dwight's respect can even protect them anymore. Musso, meanwhile, lurks in the background like a shadow Dwight can't shake. He's the kind of enemy who never raises his voice, never fires the gun himself, but still controls the outcome of every fight. Episode 2 builds on the suspicion that Musso knows more than he should. Dwight can feel it, and the audience can too. Someone close to him is feeding Musso details he shouldn't have. And that's what makes Musso so chilling. He doesn't need to spy on Dwight, when Dwight's own circle might already be doing the job for him. The paranoia creeps in with every conversation. Is it Bod? Is it someone else hiding in plain sight? Episode 2 doesn't answer, but the suspicion itself is enough to make Dwight's crew feel shaky. And in the world Dwight lives in, distrust is just as deadly as betrayal. And then there's Ray. Episode 2 doesn't let us forget about him either. While Jeremiah builds chaos in Tulsa, Ray plots from New York. And the possibility of these two forces colliding feels more real than ever. Ray already threatened Dwight's grandchildren. And those kinds of threats don't just disappear, they hang in the air, waiting for the right moment to strike. Episode 2 reminds us that Dwight isn't just fighting for his empire. He's fighting for his bloodline. That's a different kind of war, and one that doesn't allow mistakes. If Ray decides to reach into Tulsa, or worse, align with Jeremiah, Dwight won't just be outnumbered, he'll be cornered. And that's the kind of setup that usually ends in blood. Margaret's loyalty shines again in Episode 2, but every time she refuses to walk away, it feels like fate tightening its grip. She believes she's standing by Dwight out of love, but what she doesn't realize is that her choice makes her the easiest target in the game. Jeremiah, Ray, Musso, they all see her for what she is, Dwight's weak spot. The longer she stays close, the higher the chance that someone makes a move against her. Not because of who she is, but because of what she means to Dwight. Episode 2 makes this tension unbearable. You're watching her scenes not for what she's doing, but for the sense that any moment could be the one where it all falls apart. That kind of suspense is brutal, and it keeps you glued to every frame. Then there's Mitch and Cleo. Their subplot doesn't fade into the background, it grows louder. Cleo's grief sharpens into something dangerous, and Mitch is caught between wanting to protect her and wanting to support her fight. Episode 2 shows that grief in Tulsa doesn't stay quiet for long, it becomes action. And action means blood. Dwight could see Cleo as an asset, someone whose pain fuels loyalty and rage. But deep down he knows vengeance makes people unpredictable. And unpredictable allies often do more damage than enemies. If Cleo charges forward recklessly, Dwight may find himself cleaning up a mess he didn't make. And that's exactly the kind of distraction Jeremiah thrives on. What ties it all together in Episode 2 is the sense that Dwight's power isn't slipping because of one enemy, it's slipping because of all of them, pressing from every angle at once. Jeremiah spreads fear in the streets, Ray looms over his family from afar. Musso holds the leash tight, and inside his crew, doubt gnaws at loyalty. Episode 2 isn't about the war starting, it's about Dwight realizing that war is already here, surrounding him, leaving him no way out but through. And the scariest part? He still doesn't know who he can trust to walk into that war with him. Episode 2 saves its heaviest punches for the back end. And by this point, the storm Dwight's been trying to contain finally starts breaking loose. Everything that's been bubbling beneath the surface, Jeremiah's power play, Bod's unraveling, Margaret's vulnerability, Musso's pressure, and Ray's looming threats begins to collide, not in one clean explosion, but in overlapping sparks that feel like they're about to ignite at any second. The genius of this episode is that it doesn't let Dwight or the audience breathe. Every move he makes solves one problem but creates another, and by the final act, you realize there's no way out for him without blood being spilled. Jeremiah makes his presence felt stronger than ever here. It's not just about the Montague estate anymore, it's about showing Dwight and everyone watching that Tulsa belongs to him now. Episode 2 makes clear Jeremiah isn't just staking territory. He's planting seeds of fear so deep that even Dwight's loyalists begin to wonder if their leader can protect them. In the underworld, fear works faster than loyalty, and Jeremiah is playing that game perfectly. Dwight sees it happening, but the frustration of being tied to Musso's leash leaves him powerless to strike the way he wants. That helplessness eats at him, and you can see the cracks forming in his usually steady composure. Musso tightens his grip in this stretch, and the vague orders start to sound less like strategy and more like shackles. He doesn't want Dwight to think, he wants Dwight to obey. And for a man like Dwight, who built his empire on control and respect, that's the ultimate insult. The suspicion of a mole in his crew only makes it worse. Episode 2 never names the rat outright, but the tension is thick enough to choke on. Dwight knows the betrayal is close, and paranoia starts to creep into his decisions. You can feel it, he's about one step away from lashing out at his own people, and if he does, that's exactly the kind of fracture that Jeremiah and Musso can exploit. Bob's storyline feels like a lit fuse ready to blow. His anger, his grief, his sense of being ignored, it all pushes him closer to the edge. And in episode 2, the hints that he might turn on Dwight become harder to dismiss. Whether it's aligning with Jeremiah, leaking information, or simply acting reckless at the worst possible moment, Bod is no longer just a hothead. He's a liability, and everyone around Dwight can see it. The tragedy is that Dwight can't afford to lose him, but he also can't afford to keep him if this spiral continues. That's the kind of tension that doesn't fade, it explodes. Margaret's loyalty, meanwhile, feels more and more like a countdown clock. She refuses to walk away, but episode 2 shows us the cost of that decision. Every scene with her is a reminder that she's standing in the crossfire. And Dwight's enemies know it. Jeremiah could use her as leverage, Musso could threaten her as control, Ray could target her as bait. Episode 2 makes you feel like something's coming for her, it's just a question of when. And that looming danger casts a shadow over every decision Dwight makes. Love in this world isn't protection, it's a weakness waiting to be exploited. Ray's shadow stretches into the final moments. And the thought of him joining forces with Jeremiah isn't just speculation anymore. It feels like inevitability. Dwight's worst nightmare is a two-front war, and episode 2 plants the seeds for exactly that. The audience doesn't need to see Ray and Jeremiah shaking hands to feel the danger. The possibility itself is enough to make your stomach drop. That's how this episode keeps the suspense alive, not by answering every question, but by dangling the worst-case scenarios just close enough to taste. And as the credits approach, episode 2 leaves us with a sense that the first real shot of the Dwight-Jeremiah war is about to be fired. Whether it's a betrayal inside his own circle, a strike against Margaret, or a sudden ambush that catches Dwight's crew off guard, the cliffhanger doesn't feel like an if, it feels like a when. The episode's closing energy is heavy with the weight of inevitable violence. The kind of violence that doesn't just scar the city but tears alliances apart, and redraws the map of power in Tulsa. If episode 1 was the warning shot, episode 2 is the gun being cocked back. The pieces are in motion, the betrayals are bubbling, and Dwight's empire is one wrong step away from collapse. The only questions left are how far Dwight is willing to go, how much blood he's willing to spill, and which one of his so-called allies will stick the knife in first. Because one thing is clear, this war isn't waiting for Dwight to be ready. It's already here.